Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining UT-ITE's weekly seminar. My name is Mahia. I'm the vice president of the club. So our presenters today are going to be Yunfei Zhang and Nico Malfara. They're both project managers working at HDR, and they're also UofT alumni. And they'll be giving us a presentation on the applications of transportation planning in practice. And with that, the floor is all yours, Yunfei and Nico.
Thank you, Mahia. So thanks for having us, everyone. I just want to start by saying we're going to try to make this not a boring presentation and talk to you or talk at you. So we want it to be interactive, and we're using slido.com. So you can join online or on your phone, and you can put in this number here and use the passcode. So I'm just going to leave it here for a second for people to do that, and we'll be using that throughout the presentation. It's not mandatory, obviously, so don't worry if you can't do it. Okay, so we'll get started. So my name is Nico Malfara. Thank you for the introduction. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a project manager at HDR. I've been with HDR for just over 6.5 years now. I am a graduate of UofT. I graduated from the civil undergrad program in 2012, and I completed my Master's of Applied Science with Professor Matt Rorda back in 2014. So I remember these Friday sessions fondly, and I'm really, it's quite a full circle moment to be back. So thank you for having me. Yunfei, do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Yunfei. My pronouns are she, her. I'm also a project manager at HDR. I graduated just a year after Nico. I did my undergrad with engineering science, infrastructure option, and I did my PEY term in my undergrad as well. And then after that, I did my master's degree at UofT civil engineering. And I see a lot of questions in the passcode in the chat. So when we go to the interactive slides, they're going to be shown on the screen again. So we'll show it again. Don't worry. So to start today's presentation, I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. Thousands of years, it's been traditional land of Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas for the credit. Today, this place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Our safety moment today is about extreme weather ready. So if you follow the news, there's just a flood that happened in BC, very tragic, a couple of weeks ago. In Toronto, there have been ice storms or other extreme weathers that people lost electricity for many days in their homes. So for these extreme weathers, it's very important to have a plan with your family. So how will you contact each other? Where would you go for safety if you need to evacuate your home? And also, when will you do during and after the severe weather after it has been passed? It's also very important to make an emergency kit. I'm not asking everyone to, stock up and bulk up on toilet papers. Please don't do that. But it's very important to have, the basic food, water, radio, phone, and batteries for any electronic devices that you need, and first aid kit, all those elements. And think about how, if you have to live without power for 3 days, what kind of things you would need. And this will depend on your personal needs as well. So if you are on certain medications, make sure you have those ready with you as well. And make sure you follow weather forecasts so you know what's coming so you can better prepare for yourself and your family. And then lastly, climate change is here, and I hope everyone agree with this. It's not an argument. And that's one of the reasons why there's so many extreme weathers that's happening. So I would encourage everyone to think about ways to live a low carbon life. Maybe bike or walk instead of driving. Maybe I'm trying to buy, it's Black Friday today, but maybe think about buying less stuff, maybe buy secondhand, or if you need to get rid of certain things, donate them instead of just throwing them in the trash. And these little things can protect our environment. And then hopefully our future generations will have a better environment and will not have these extreme weathers that's happening frequently.
Thanks, Yunfei. And quickly, we also like to do inclusion, diversity, and equity moments at HDR. So today I want to quickly talk about pronouns. You'll see that we are featuring them in the presentation. So pronouns are words that refer to either the people talking or someone or something that is being talked about. And gender pronouns specifically refer to people that you are talking about. So why are these important? So pronouns are one of the ways we portray our identities. And really, you can't always tell what someone's gender pronouns are just by looking at them. So when someone asks you to use their gender pronouns, they're asking you to respect their identity. And ultimately, knowing and using someone's gender pronouns is really a positive way to support the person that you're engaging with. Just want to quickly give a little plug for HDR. Our company, it's over 100 years old. We have over 10,000 employees and over 200 offices around the world. And we're local here in Toronto in Canada. And we're doing a lot of transportation planning work in the region. So, when you're looking for a job, feel free to reach out to us. We'd be happy to talk to you. So just a quick fun poll to see if the Slido is working. Who has heard of HDR before? Very cool. Okay, so most people have heard of us before. We always get this question, doesn't HDR mean high dynamic range? So it's good to see that most people have heard of us before. Okay, so the purpose of our presentation today, we really were contemplating, what would be something interesting that this group would want to hear about, and something that I always thought about when I was in your shoes was, how is what I'm learning right now or what I'm researching going to be useful in the real world? And how do we apply these principles in practice? So hopefully, when you leave this presentation today, you have a better understanding of some of the ways of the first principles that you're learning at school about transportation planning are applied in real world projects. And we want to really show how these projects and these principles can really benefit society in a positive way. So back to Slido. So I want to know, to all of you, what does transportation planning mean to you? What, if you could say in one word or maybe two words, what does it mean to you? What do you think that entails? So we got transit, mobility, sustainability. Improve quality of life, destination. So this is a word cloud. So the more of the same responses that will show up bigger. So looks like accessibility, that's a great one. Equity. Moving people efficiently and compassionately. I love that. urban development, connectivity, fun, design. Access, so yes, accessibility now kind of coming to the forefront with equity, sustainability. These are all great answers, and these all definitely are parts of transportation planning. So it's really hard to put a definition to this, but we tried. So transportation planning could be said that it's the discipline that examines and evaluates the potential of future actions, policies, goals, investments, and designs to improve movement of people and goods, and by all the modes of transportation that we know of. So motor vehicles, public transportation, walking, cycling, and all the new forms of mobility. And it's also providing cooperative interaction between the public, transportation professionals, and decision makers. So transportation planning balances the needs of access, mobility, and safety with environmental, economic, and social equity concerns. And our presentation today is going to feature just a few of the practice areas of transportation planning. So as we noted, there are so many facets of transportation planning, and it would be very hard to discuss them all in just 1 hour. So we're going to do our best to touch on them, but we've kind of grouped them into these 4 practice areas. The first one, travel demand modeling, which we know the university is a center of excellence in. So we thought that would be something interesting to show how that skill is used in the real world. We'll also talk about master planning, multi-modal planning, and complete streets. And then I'll talk about transit planning and something that we call functional planning, which includes environmental assessments.
So I'll before a little segue before we go into the 4 areas that Nico just mentioned. This is really a golden era, at least the way we see it, for transportation planning or just the transportation industry. And there are a couple of reasons. There's a lot of new technology that's happening. You can see e-scooters on the street, electric vehicles is happening, autonomous vehicle is happening, a lot of new areas of research. And I mentioned climate change earlier, and a lot of the projects we do are looking at infrastructure resiliency, and I'm sure there's going to be a huge need for that. And also just the entire GTA region, it's growing really fast. So on the title, there's this article from Toronto Star that Toronto area will hit 8 million people in the next 10 years. I think the numbers are 10 million in 2045. And Toronto is going to become the second largest city in North America. And with population growth, there's going to be a lot of need for transportation infrastructure improvements. And then there's also a lot of investments into our industry. The bottom right corner shows the Toronto region will have more than double its rapid transit network within the next 10 years. So from the 50s till now, there's 79 kilometers of that rapid transit that's been built, but we have 89 kilometers within the 10 years. So this includes some of the subway lines, such as Ontario Line, includes Eglinton LRT, also a lot of GO Rail Transit expansion projects. So there's a lot of really exciting projects that's happening as well. Next slide, please. So the first part we're going to talk about is travel demand modeling, and which is very special to me. When I started working at HDR, my title was a junior transportation modeler. So I did a lot of modeling projects. I did my entire PY term doing modeling. So the way I see it, there are kind of 3 types of modeling projects. One is model development. The GTA model that's developed in-house at UofT by Professor Eric Miller is very widely used in pretty much all local municipalities in the GTA. There's also the GGHM model that's developed by MTO and is used in a lot of the provincial projects. And these projects are very time consuming because you're building something from scratch, and then that can be applied either with local municipalities projects or universities research project. And then the second part is model adaptation or calibration. So once local municipalities take these models, such as the GTA model, they will calibrate it specifically to their city's needs. Maybe they have better data just on their local network, and we'll look at them and then adapt the model better to suit the cities or the municipalities' need. And then the last one is model application. So once the model is calibrated, it can be used. We're going to use the model to forecast the demand. And the purpose of these models is, it includes future land use forecasts. And based on that, we'll look at demand on either the road or transit network, which are traditionally the focus area of these travel demand models. I know there's a lot of research happening for improving the active transportation aspect of it. When I did my master's at UofT, I actually was working on the GTA model and looking at the active transportation mode choice part of it. And once we have a good understanding of the road and transit network's demand, we'll take that information and use it to inform decisions. Either we want to have road widening projects, we want to have a new transit line, or we want to improve transit service of certain corridors. And then that provides inputs to these improvements. And one thing I want to point out is when we look at the way we use models, we have to be very, maybe critical is not the right word, but we have to have the critical thinking to understand what these demands actually mean. So if you look at a road network and the volume over capacity is over 1, which means it's congested, when we look at these numbers and look at improvements, we do not necessarily just say this will trigger widening projects. We can look at ways to improve transit. We can look at prioritizing some of the cycling facilities to offload the projected demand that's on the network. So some 2 applications of the model, this the pictures on the right. The first one is for the Golden Horseshoe plan, the GGH plan that our team is working on, is trying to wrap up. We use the province GGH model and look at the demand. The one that's shown on the screen, that's the demand on the rapid transit network and also the highway network. The bottom right is the Vaughan Transportation Plan, which I'll talk about in some later slides. So this one, we looked at travel times that's projected in the GTA model. And then the more blue areas are the areas that have poor transit accessibility. And then the redder areas means the zones have good transit accessibility. So when we looked at that and we look at areas that neighborhoods that may have poor accessibility to jobs, and some of the improvements that we made based on this model projection is to improve some of the local connections, either improving transit headways or adding new transit services on the network. Next slide. So the second part is master planning, multimodal planning, and complete streets. And there are quite a wide variety of projects that's under this umbrella. Usually these are the long-term planning projects. So looking at the 2030, 2041, 2051, sometimes for the GGH plan, we had 2071 horizon year, looking at the overall demand and the overall visions and improvements for the network. So that's the second point. So for these projects, we usually recommend infrastructure improvements, and also policy directions is a big part of it. From these, we'll recommend certain things, certain action plans for our client to look at further in their later study. Next slide, please. So the first example I'm going to talk about is the Vaughan Transportation Plan, which is the Vaughan's Transportation Master Plan. It is a strategic policy document that provides a framework and recommendations to guide future transportation-related studies, projects, initiatives, and decisions for the future. So there's three kind of major components of the Vaughan Transportation Plan. First, we want to establish a vision to have clear goals and objectives of how we want the city's transportation network to move in the future, in the 2041, 2051 horizon. And then we looked at existing conditions and the projected future conditions. And based on that, we have a list of recommendations, actions, and policy directions. Next slide, please. So here are some samples of what we would recommend was going to come out of this transportation master plan. So we proposed alternative solutions that can improve the city's network. So I'm not going to go through them one by one into details, but for any transportation studies, we usually have a business as usual network that looks at the plans that's already in place, this either city or region with the provincial's plan, and look at if we just keep this business as usual way and what's going to happen in the future. And based on that, we provided new improvements, and that's in our alternative 1, 2, and 3. And for transportation plan, we have the first alternative is only road improvements. And then the second alternative is only active transportation, so walking and cycling and transit improvements. And then lastly is we call it multi-modal alternative, which has a bit of road and a bit of AT and transit improvements. And public consultation is a big part of the transportation studies that we do. The Vaughan Transportation Plan, we currently have a virtual open house that's happening. So I'm going to use this moment to kind of market our open house a little bit. We have a really nice website that's been developed. If you either live or work in Vaughan, or you just want to check out what kind of work that's happening, you can go to vaughntransportationplan.ca and look at our virtual open house material. And if you have any feedbacks, you can always interact with us through the website. Next slide, please. Oh, somebody has already started participating. So this question is, have you participated in a public open house before? I think if you're in the transportation industry or you're in school, everyone has heard about public open house, but not everyone participates, right? I'm guilty of it. I don't go to all the ones that's happening in my neighborhood, but it's a great way to get your inputs to the project. And for a project team, for ourselves, it's not only just a requirement in the municipal class EA process that you need to have 1 or 2 or how many open house in this project. It also is really important information for us. So any inputs that we collect from the public, we treat it seriously, and then we'll actually, consider that in our improvements and in our ultimate recommendations. So if you have not participated in public open house, I highly encourage you to look at them in the future. And for the 6% of what's that again, is public open house where we engage the public and collect their inputs. Next slide, please. So this is a map that's you can find it in the Vaughan Transportation Plan virtual open house. This is one of the alternatives that we're presenting to the public that We are recommending certain active transportation priority areas, or we have rapid transit corridor improvement recommendations, road extension recommendations. And this is the draft alternative that we are putting out, and then we're collecting inputs from the public and see, they like this part, they don't like this part, maybe this is an area that we should be looking at further. So this is that's presented to the public right now. And with that, once we collect the feedback from the public, we're going to take it back and refine our alternative, and then eventually have this list of recommendations that's for the city in the next 10, 20, 30 years. Next slide, please. And policy directions is another big part of these transportation master plan projects. So I have 3 examples that's on the screen. These are the ones I personally find pretty interesting for our project. We're doing a lot more, but just give you some ideas of what will come out of these transportation master plan projects. So the first one is we're developing a transportation data collection and implementation plan for the city. So the city of Vaughan does not currently have an official data collection program. And then we're, based on our review, based on our interviews with our neighboring municipalities, we are providing some recommendations about this is something you should look at. These are the areas that you may want to look at, and these are the technologies that you may want to use for your data collection program. And the second one is a climate change resiliency paper that we are working on. So the map on the top right corner is a little small, but this is when we looked at the cities. Well, we conducted weather forecast or the rainfall forecast and the floodplain projection in the future in the 2051 or 2080 horizon. And then we look at the city's infrastructure at either their intersection that may be at risk, their GO rails or some road segments that may at risk. And then we looked at them and then provided some recommendations, either you retrofit them now or you design alternative solutions, or in the future when we propose any infrastructures that's at these potentially at-risk locations, climate change or designing resilient infrastructure should be something to be considered. And the last one is a pretty interesting one, is we're looking at a very high level conceptual plan for aerial mobility. So potentially a gondola systems. I do want to caveat that this is a very high level conceptual design. This is when we prepared the proposal, this is something we thought maybe the city of Vaughan would be interested in, and they were. So we're looking at this for 1/4 of the city. Next slide, please. And the next example, or the kind of projects we do, is complete street study. This one, I have the title Mississauga Changing Lanes, is how they call their complete street study. But the concept of complete street study apply to all municipalities, right? The bottom line is, how can we design our streets so they're safe for users of all ages and abilities? So this means people who walk, people who are on their bikes, and people, children or seniors, for all road users. And for complete streets guidelines, we provide directions of how to design some of the elements, such as pedestrian cycling infrastructure, how to design an intersection or lane width recommendations, design speed recommendations, to ensure or help designing the infrastructure that's safe for everyone. So some examples of what we may do, the top right corner, that's looking at if a vehicle is traveling at a certain speed and hits a pedestrian, what's the chance of the pedestrian that can survive? So if you're at around 30 kilometers per hour, most pedestrians will survive. But if you're walking on the street and get hit at 60 kilometers per hour, then only 1 out of 10 of pedestrians will survive. So what this means is, for a lot of these complete street studies, we're recommending the city to reduce their design speed, how they're designing their streets to make vehicles slow down, or how to change some of the traffic calming measures or lane width elements to, again, make them slow down. The bottom right, there are 2 images on curb design. So again, this is all related to making vehicles slow down and having pedestrians to cross with the less distance. Smaller curb radii, when trucks or vehicles turn, they will force to slow down and look at people who cross the street. And another technique that we recommend is using effective turning radius. So what this means is, imagine a large vehicle, like a big truck. They do need to use a bigger corner radius to make that turn. But instead of making the corner really wide, we allow for this effective turning radius movement, which means they can turn not to the curb line, but to the middle line in that same direction. So it allows for a bigger curve, but at the same time, it still maintains the small curb radii that could ensure the safety of pedestrians or any vulnerable users. So with that, I think that's the end of my part, and I will pass it on to Nico to talk about transit planning.
Thanks, Yunfei. And just before I start this section, I just want to note that I think it'll become really evident that even though we're categorizing these areas kind of into 4 practice areas, they're so intertwined, and every project has a component of one of them within them. So it's hard to talk about them in isolation. So you'll see transit planning, again, it's a really broad umbrella and includes a number of different sub areas. So within transit planning, some of the things that we do are related to service delivery, which includes scheduling. A lot of the work that I do personally is around the infrastructure planning of transit projects. So, determining where the routes should go, where terminals should be, what the stops will look like or be located, and even planning for maintenance and storage facilities. We also help clients develop plans for their fleet and how they can transition fleet. For example, right now, a lot of clients are looking to transition their bus fleets to be completely emissions free. So looking at electrifying potentially. We also do a lot of marketing and communication services. For example, when a region wants to introduce, say, a bus rapid transit system and it's completely new to the public, there needs to be a concerted effort to market, educate, and communicate what the benefits of that BRT system are going to be to the public. So we can do that as well. We also help clients with fare systems, developing operating and capital budgets. We can do performance monitoring. So once a system is in place, looking at how it's actually performing. And as Yunfei mentioned previously, community engagement and explaining the benefits to the community are a really big part of what we do. So one of the biggest projects that HDR currently has is the Ontario line. And I just wanted to kind of quickly talk about our involvement from the early days of the project and where it all came from. The relief line, which it was referred to previously. So I think it's been contemplated since the 1910. So this project has been thought of, and they saw a need for it for quite some time. But obviously it's 2021 and we're still on the road to getting it built. But HDR really got involved in it back in before 2012, but we completed the downtown rapid transit expansion study for the city of Toronto. back in 2012. And really what that looked at was, what is needed to solve the congestion issues that we were seeing on the Yonge line, and also help serve some of the shoulder areas of downtown that weren't currently being served adequately by rapid transit. And through that study, a number of different routes were identified, and a big part of the transit planning process is, not just drawing lines on maps, but looking at and evaluating them from a multi-criteria evaluation perspective, and looking at things like not just ridership, but also considering who are you serving, looking at equity, looking at environmental impacts of the project, looking at how much congestion relief you're providing, and also looking at just the overall societal benefit of that line is going to have. So coming out of that project, it took a while, but in 2018, we completed the Downtown Relief Line Transit Project Assessment Process, or TPAP for short, which is really the environmental document for the approvals for the relief line, which is the pink line that you saw here. And we did that for the city of Toronto. And then around about the same time as we finished that study, we started planning for the northerly extension of the line with Metrolinx. So that's the bottom left picture here. And you can see again, similar to that 2012 study, what we did was starting to figure out, where should this extension go? And really broad brush strokes, figuring out where should the station locations be, evaluating those from a route perspective. Sort of as that project was kicking off, I think everyone now knows in 2019, the project was changed, I'll say, not canceled. And that's when we heard about the Ontario line. And the idea was, the planning for the relief line and the northerly extension were all predicated on the assumption that we would be using the exact same technology as the line 1 and line 2 subway lines. And so when you lock yourself in with an assumption like that, it really hamstrings you in terms of design features, how large the infrastructure has to be. So if you're tunneling, how large that tunnel has to be, how long your stations have to be, or how big, structures. So if you're above grade, to carry that specific type of technology, you're going to need a certain size of structure, and that can have really significant implications for cost. And as we know, governments are very they're very constrained in terms of funding right now for these major transit projects. And so finding ways to do more with less is really important. And so the Ontario line really flipped it, the original study on its head and said, okay, if we don't lock ourselves into these assumptions, what can we do? So it really has the same bones as these two studies previously to it. But what it does is it says, okay, let's look at a different technology like light metro, and how can we do more with less money? And so now we're going to be building a longer line. I think the relief line was around like 7.5 kilometers. Now we're looking at 15 kilometers. And I think the relief line had 7 stations, and now we're looking at 15 stations. So it's going to be a major improvement for the city and the region as a whole. Some of the other work that we do is around conventional bus and bus rapid transit systems. So again, doing more with less here. A lot of our clients, especially in the US, but also here in Canada, are thinking, okay, maybe we don't have enough funds or ridership, population and employment density to build subway or metro lines, but how can we provide more reliability and frequency for people traveling with a bus network? And so we see a lot of bus rapid transit systems proliferating, and we help them do service plans, and our transit architects help us design these really beautiful stations that have more passenger amenities than just a typical bus stop. So they could be fully enclosed. They can have heating with them. There's real-time information at these stops and accessibility features. I know we only have 10 minutes, so I'm going to kind of power through this one. Another project that I'm working on is the extension of the Huron-Ontario LRT into the city of Brampton. Similar to the Relief Line and the Ontario Line, it has a storied past. Basically, it was contemplated in 2010. Unfortunately, the city of Brampton in 2015 canceled a portion of the route that was going through the city, the downtown. And so HDR was brought on to look at alternative ways to get to the downtown in 2017. And currently the project was rescoped in 2019 to look at evaluating the trade-offs between a surface LRT and an underground LRT. And so something that I find myself doing in my job a lot is helping clients make decisions, these very large decisions. And so something that we do really well is use business case frameworks to evaluate these projects and look at the strategic benefit of the project, but then weigh that against the economic and financial impacts. And so that's what we've done with Brampton. So the project's currently unfunded, so it'll be interesting to see what happens next there. And our last area is functional planning and environmental assessment. So all I wanted to say here was that all of these projects usually do not live, they're not just a research project where you can go off and kind of spend years figuring out the answer or doing it in isolation, just your project team alone. They're usually part of a process, a government mandated process. So in Ontario, one that we typically follow is called the municipal class environmental assessment process, but there's a number of other processes that could be undertaken depending on the type of project. And the point of this is really that there's, review periods that you have to abide by with agencies, but also the public. And this is also where you get to take into account design. So we talked a lot about the planning side, but part of planning is determining feasibility of fit. So it's nice to draw a line on a map, but how is that actually going to play out in the real world? What are the impacts going to be? Are you going to need to widen a right of way? Are you going to need to impact someone's property or remove a driveway or cut down trees? And so all of these need to be assessed. You need to figure out what the impacts are going to be, and then you need to figure out a mitigation plan of how you're going to deal with that. So that's a big part of the work that we do. And one of the projects that I'm working on where we're doing this is for the city of Mississauga on Lakeshore Road. So looking at, converting this street here doesn't look very appealing at the moment, and trying to achieve the goals and objectives of the city, that top right-hand corner, what they want to see for their waterfront. So we did a functional planning and environmental assessment process to look at incorporating bus rapid transit onto Lakeshore Road. So this is just sort of showing you here at a planning level, the type of design work that we would do here. So laying it out, determining a cross section, and then seeing what the impacts would be on the area. Okay, so I wanted to leave some time for questions.